ultimately what you have to do is you have to protect where the fish live. And that is the big uphill battle, because neither the governor nor the commissioner are willing to make the really tough decisions that protect the fish where they live.
The Riverkeeper Revisited. John Cronin is a busy man these days, between patrolling the river for the Hudson River Fishermen's Association and spending time in the courtroom filing lawsuits against the State Environmental Commissioner. We'll hear what's the latest when we come back, right here on the river. You may remember in Logbook 1, John Cronin took us for a ride in the Riverkeeper, a boat he uses to patrol the Hudson in search of polluters. These days, John is representing the Hudson River Fishermen's Association in a lawsuit filed against the State Department of Environmental Conservation, part of a long-running dispute regarding striped bass fishing in the Hudson.
In 1975, it became clear that there were enough PCBs in the Hudson River from General Electric plants up in Fort Edward and Hudson Falls that fish in the Hudson, specifically important species like striped bass, American eel, catfish, white perch, carp, and goldfish, had been found unfit for human consumption. They had too high levels of PCBs in them, and the sale of those species were banned. They were important species of commercial fishermen, and it really marked, for those species, marked the end of a long tradition of commercial fishing on the Hudson. And for 11 years, that ban stayed in place all by itself, just on the sale of fish and commercial fishing, but the recreational fishery was open. Last year in 1986, in what seemed like an overnight decision, the Department of Environmental Conservation decided, in what they called an emergency regulation, that the striped bass fishery for sport fishing should be closed on the Hudson, and that people shouldn't be allowed to take fish even if they were sport fishing, whether they were selling them or not. And the problem with that regulation is, well, on several counts. One is that back in '79, 4 years after the PCB revelations, we got a piece of legislation passed up in Albany that called for a Hudson River Fishery Management Committee. In our view, it was the only way that this fishery could get restored again, where someday we might be able to sell the fish and they wouldn't be off limits for human consumption. And under that law, the commissioner was required to appoint a fishery advisory committee, and that advisory committee, which is made up of citizens from up and down the Hudson Valley, recreational fishermen, commercial fishermen, conservationists, would have to give their advice and consultation to the commissioner. Actually, the commissioner would have to seek that advice and consultation before he promulgated regulations about the fishery, make sure that they were in line with restoring the fishery. And last year's emergency regulation, not only did the commissioner not consult that committee or consult that program, but the commissioner decided that his hand-picked committee would learn about it at a public hearing with the rest of the public. And when that committee said to the commissioner's representative, "Why did you do this to us? Why weren't we consulted before you closed down the sports fishery?" they were told that we didn't discuss it with you because we didn't want this recommendation or this regulation discussed in bar rooms and clubhouses. Now, mind you, the chairman of that committee is a world-renowned ichthyologist for the Museum of Natural History, and he didn't take it so kindly. He was told that his consultation was not sought because the commissioner was afraid he was going to discuss these things in bar rooms. To make this program meaningful, the commissioner has to use the committee. We thought there was no recourse but to file a lawsuit, which we did, with a majority of the committee joining as plaintiffs in this lawsuit, requiring the department to follow the requirements of the fishery management law and to consult with his committee before he promulgates regulations. Rather than fight this out in the courtroom, the Conservation Department decided that they would try and settle with the plaintiffs out of court. And in that settlement, which we reached in December of last year, the department agreed that on January 5th of this year, they would go back to the committee and tell them what the department's intentions were for 1987 for striped bass regulations and get the committee's consultation. January 5th came and went with no word from the Conservation Department, no word from the commissioner. February 5th came and went, and on February 27th, in an announcement to newspapers, the commissioner revealed his new regulations for Hudson River striped bass. The members of the committee learned about it in the newspapers. It was too late for that recommendation to be discussed before the opening of striped bass season, which is on March 15th. That opening has come and gone, and the regulations still are not final. The recommendation was for a 33-inch size limit for striped bass, a regulation that was never discussed with the committee, that came out of the clear blue sky, and some of the best experts in the Hudson Valley all agree is a ecologically ignorant regulation anyway. Again, we were left with no choice but to go to court. And this time we've gone to court to try and find the department in contempt of court for violating a court order, which required them to make a recommendation on January 5th that we would have the time to discuss. What the end of this long intertwined story that goes back 12 years now is going to be, I just don't know. It's easy to reach some conclusions. One of those conclusions is that the motivation for this must be political. It's not ecological. It's not in keeping with the requirements of the Hudson River Fishery Management Law. And it's certainly not in keeping with the goals of that law, which is to restore this fishery. You're not left with anything but either stupidity or political motivation. I'm giving the department the benefit of the doubt that it's not stupidity. That leaves you with political motivation. I mean, that's all I can deduce from this experience. Meanwhile, you've got folks who have small mom and pop bait and tackle stores who wanted to know months ago what was going to happen this fishing season, and they still don't know. And probably the thing that's most important to reflect on in this entire issue is the finding of the department's own administrative law judge in 1976 about the PCB issue. And that finding was that the reason there were PCBs in the Hudson and PCBs in Hudson River fish were twofold. One, because of corporate abuse by the General Electric Company in discharging the PCBs, but the other reason was regulatory failure by the Department of Environmental Conservation, because General Electric had permission to discharge those PCBs. So where do we find ourselves in 1987? A completely closed down fishery, a department that refuses to consult with the commissioner's own advisory committee, people with bait and tackle stores who don't know what's going to happen to their business, sports and commercial fishermen who are in the dark. All of this supposedly because of PCBs, which the state gave GE permission to discharge in the first place. And when you talk to department personnel, Conservation Department personnel about this, they tend to get very sanctimonious and say, oh, we're just trying to do what's right. And you have to remind them that we're in the situation we're in because of the things they did that were wrong, and that they owe a debt to this river. They owe a debt to the people who use the river, and they owe a debt to the fishermen and the bait and tackle stores and everybody else who wants to see this a healthy river, and that they're owed a lot better than being told that they will be excluded from the regulatory process because the department's afraid they're going to discuss things in bar rooms and clubhouses. It's a pretty sad state of affairs.
John Cronin says the striped bass species has been a political football in New York State for generations.
Historically, regulations about striped bass out here on the Hudson River have been promulgated with the convenience of Long Island in mind. Long Island also has the benefits of having that species to fish for. But Long Island doesn't only fish for Hudson River striped bass, it fishes for Chesapeake striped bass too. And Chesapeake striped bass are in a severe decline. So out on Long Island, they've had to impose some pretty strict regulations to make life easier for themselves, and rather than face Long Island fishermen squarely and say the Hudson River is different than Long Island, the department has caved into the pressure of promulgating the same regulations on the Hudson as they promulgated on Long Island, and that just takes a big burden off their shoulders, a big political burden. And last year and the year before, Governor Cuomo had gotten a lot of criticism for strict regulation of striped bass on Long Island. And rather than face the criticism this year of people on Long Island saying, but why aren't you doing the same things to the Hudson? Rather than saying to the people on Long Island, because the Hudson River striped bass are different, because that's their spawning river, it's a different habitat, you manage them differently. Rather than say that and make the rational and intelligent explanation, the department did the politically expedient thing, which was to just heap us in with Long Island, and therefore not consult with the Hudson River Fishery Advisory Committee. Because if they did, the Hudson River Fishery Advisory Committee would say, this is not Long Island, this is the Hudson River. You've got to manage it like it's the Hudson River. These regulations that you have on Long Island are not going to fit the bill. It's a shame that the governor and the commissioner chose to do the politically expedient thing rather than the thing that is right for the striped bass and right for the people who live here on the Hudson.
Creating a way to protect the habitat, Cronin says, would be the first step towards preserving the striped bass and the investment the public has in the river.
Ultimately, what you have to do is you have to protect where the fish live. And that is the big uphill battle, because neither the governor nor the commissioner are willing to make the really tough decisions that protect the fish where they live. So where we are right now is a very important spawning habitat for striped bass. And this habitat is virtually not protected. The only way it is protected is when citizen groups file lawsuits. It is not protected by the department. So in the end, the real tragedy is that all these regulations that have been discussed in the past 2 years, and the violations of the fishery management law and the abuse of that commissioner's committee are almost a bunch of straw men that we've got to knock down to get to the real issue of how do we declare this habitat inviolate? How do we protect the fish where they spawn? Protecting the fish from mom and pop bait and tackle stores is not the way you protect the fish. You protect the fish by protecting where they live. And that's politically a very difficult thing to do. So part of the motivation that I see for what they've done in the past 2 years, is to give the appearance of being very tough and being very stern, but at the expense of the people who would like to use the river, and at the expense of the fish, because what we really need is habitat protection, not a bunch of silly regulations that target fishermen who have been the front line of defense for this river for 20 years.
Cronin says in 1986, information regarding the health status of Hudson River striped bass was not obtained by the state, and it's due to the lack of responsibility on the part of the DEC.
In 1986, the Conservation Department, very conveniently I might add, 1986 the Conservation Department took no fish from the Hudson River for PCB analysis. It's the first year since 1975, the first year since the PCB issue first broke, that this has happened. So we have no information, no current information to use to answer the question of what is the status of these fish right now? How much PCBs do they have in their bodies? What is the public threat? There is no data from 1986. And I don't know whether there's going to be data from 1987. I honestly can't say.
The Hudson River Fishermen's Association has levied a host of charges against the DEC, and more may come in the future.
We're charging the department with violation of the Hudson River Fishery Management Act. We're charging the department with contempt of court. And right now, we are doing the legal research to possibly mount a much larger lawsuit, which will be aimed at requiring the department to do a certain amount of sampling and analyses of Hudson River fish. That will require the department to present, by this time next year, a 20-year strategy for the management of this fishery. And and the other thing we've asked for is we've asked for New York State Assembly and New York State Senate oversight hearings to find out why the department has behaved in this fashion, to look into the politics of this situation, and to investigate the failures of the department to follow the regulatory process and to do the type of analysis that of this fish they should have done in 1986. We've asked Assemblyman Hinchy to conduct these hearings. They should call all the department personnel that have any responsibilities in this in front of the Environmental Conservation Committee in the Assembly and be made to answer those tough questions, and those people should be subpoenaed if necessary. This has gone on for much too long. The situation has gone from very bad in 1975 to much worse in 1987, because not only do we still have the PCB problem, but we've gotten to a point now where the Conservation Department feels so confident in its failures that they can be downright arrogant to the public and to the Commissioner's own advisory committee. So we've sought legal action on those two matters. We are investigating another lawsuit right now, and we've asked for oversight hearings.
The commercial and the sport fishermen on the Hudson are very frustrated and angry over the Commissioner's actions.
You know, there are commercial fishermen on the Hudson that are fifth-generation commercial fishermen. There's one family down in Rockland County, the DeGroat family, who can practically trace their lineage back to the Dutch settlers. You know, the oldest member of the DeGroat family is 76, and his grandfather used to be a schooner captain on the Hudson River. And when he wasn't doing that, he was a commercial fisherman. They fish the way that the Dutch settlers learned from the Indians, and what they have seen in their lifetime now, in the 1970s and 80s, if they've lost most of their fishery. They've lost a big part of that tradition. They've lost a big part of the traditional commercial fishery. You can still fish for American shad on the Hudson, and the shad season's about to start, and the fishermen still gear up for that. But there's less interest in the commercial fishery than there's ever been before because of what's happened, and it's been snatched out of their hands. At a time when we can ill afford to get rid of any kind of small industry that's compatible with environmental protection and that can provide jobs out on this river. There are men who work this river who are fourth and fifth generation fishermen who are unfortunately probably going to die having seen most of the fishery they grew up with taken out of their hands, in great part due to the Conservation Department. And that's a very sad thing, and it makes them very angry. It makes me very sad. I think that there's a major piece of Hudson River heritage in danger here, as well as a very important industry. And an industry made up of people who have a great investment in protection of the Hudson, and who have always been at the front line of protecting this river with whatever it takes, lawsuits or whatever, for 2 decades now, over 2 decades. So they're frustrated, they're angry, and probably saddest of all is what I was told by some friends of mine in Croton who run a bait and tackle shop right down in the village there. They said, you know, John, these lawsuits are great, and we appreciate the time that you and the Hudson River Fishermen's Association are putting in, but don't bang your head against the wall, John, because those people up in Albany don't care about people like us. What can you say to that other than maybe say, hey, Governor Cuomo, whatever happened to the family of New York?
The future of striped bass fishing on the river, Cronin tells us, sits in the palms of the DEC's hands.
The irony is that on the Hudson River, right now, we have the healthiest population of striped bass on the entire east coast of the United States. It's an abundant fishery. Right now, as I sit here and speak, striped bass and shad are all starting to get the signals from this river that the time is coming for them to swim up here by the millions to spawn. Down in the Chesapeake Bay, they wish they had a situation like that, but they don't. And on other estuaries up and down this east coast, they're experiencing severe declines in these fish. We've got a very healthy population, and it's a sad irony that under those circumstances, you're not allowed to fish for them. Whether or not we're going to be able to anytime in the near or distant future is anybody's guess. Unless the Conservation Department wises up and starts to meet this debt that it owes to the public and starts to protect the public trust that is their responsibility for this river. Until that happens, we have no hopes of getting this fishery back.
As we mentioned in Logbook 32 recently, the state is proposing to dredge out some of the PCBs from the river as part of a cleanup solution. But Cronin says the Hudson River Fishermen's Association just has not taken up a firm side on this issue.
A funny thing about the PCB dredging project is that we have been told for years that one of the motivations that we should have for supporting this project is because it was going to make striped bass less contaminated sooner, that we would have access to it sooner, and they'd wave striped bass data around to prove their point. 1987, we find ourselves in a situation that PCBs aside, the department may be promulgating regulations that are going to permanently close this fishery for reasons only known to the department, which makes us wonder whether or not we should really be supporting this project. Now what is our motivation? When the department's made it clear that PCBs aside, they don't really care about this fish, they don't really care about protecting its habitat, and that they're willing to promulgate regulations that are based on a whole other part of the state that we're going to have to live with, which may mean that we may not be able to fish for these fish again, even if PCB has disappeared off the face of the earth. We have to sit and wonder, what's our motivation? If we're not going to be allowed to fish for the fish, and if the department's not willing to restore the fishery, not willing to protect the habitat, what's our motivation to see $20 or $30 million spent on PCB removal to give us access to a fish that we're not going to be allowed access to anyway? It's thrown a whole new question in with all the others about this project that we find a very compelling question. We are right now on the fence as to whether or not we're going to support that project.
With all of the obstacles facing John Cronin, he remains optimistic, and he says he'll continue to pursue this issue until he receives some answers.
What keeps me going is all the public support there is for the Hudson River. That we've got a knowledgeable public in the Hudson Valley, we've got an aware public, that despite the Conservation Department, I know that I'm surrounded by people who care and people who support what we're doing. People in Kingston, people in Newburgh, people in Cold Spring, Poughkeepsie, Albany, Yonkers, Nyack, Tarrytown, Stony Point. The support for this river and protection of it is just so overwhelming that with that to bolster you, it's hard to lose faith. That's number one. Number two is that I don't concern myself with the issue of whether or not I'm going to see results in my lifetime. The problems we have on the river have been caused by people who are not able to think beyond their own lifetimes. The polluters, people in political positions, the people who don't see the big picture, who just see maybe this far in front of their face. I'm content to know that the work we're doing now is going to be of great benefit to the generation that follows me, and the generation that follows that generation. This is going to be a river that's going to be accessible to children of mine. Also, I'm very optimistic. All right, those two things combine to make me very optimistic, and I'm an optimistic person by nature anyway. The fact is that we have seen results in our lifetime anyway. There's a reason why we've got a real healthy population of fish on the Hudson, despite the problems that are happening on other parts of the river. And it's because we do have a 20-year history of protecting this river. But I know that in my own vision, and I share it with other environmental groups and fishermen, is that we can and will have a river here, an estuary here, that will be a model for the rest of the country, where people who have all different ways of using it will be able to live together and use it together. Commercial fishermen, industries, commerce, restaurants, marinas. If we can't do it on the Hudson, you can't do it anywhere.
But one thing you can do for sure is join us again next week right here. Thanks for coming aboard this time on the river.